Welcome to the show. And just before we start, I want to share something with you very quickly. I just put together a one-page system for professional speakers who crush it on stage, but struggle to turn those gigs into referrals. Or maybe you're worried that you're not going to get the referrals when you start doing your gigs. It's called the One Gig Referral System, and it shows you exactly how to turn one gig into five without begging or without feeling weird about it. If you want me to send this your way, come and find me on LinkedIn. Send me a message that says one page, one gig, and I will send that to you right away. Now, do you ever find yourself feeling overwhelmed by everything that is going on digitally? Like AI is developing so fast, there are so many different AI tools that we can use now. And even other tools that we may use online are adding more and more functionality as AI develops. And certainly some of that is ultimately making our lives easier, but sometimes we're having to take the time to learn it and feeling overwhelmed, or we're having to use multiple different tools. Now, I love the idea that we could just simplify, but what if simplification isn't an option for you? Well, my guest today is Craig Mattson, and Craig is going to help us to deal with digital overwhelm, especially when we're not in a position where we can avoid or simplify what we have to do. Craig has some great advice and suggestions for us for how we can reduce the overwhelm and stay on top of all the latest advances in technology that we have to deal with. So come and connect with me for the download on LinkedIn and enjoy the episode. Welcome to Present Influence, the show for professional communicators who want to inspire, impact, and influence. My name's John Ball. I'm your guide on this journey to mastery level communication skills. Craig, I'm very happy to welcome you to Present Influence. Thanks for coming and joining us today.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be with you, eager to talk about the connections between our work.
You have a great deal of research into a topic that I think is going to be and feel relevant to everybody, which is around work culture and digital overwhelm. So tell us a little bit more maybe about why you started to explore that path and what sort of things you've been discovering and uncovering with your research.
I started with the overwhelm and I moved to the culture, I think is how the path went. In 2022, I started interviewing rising professionals, quarter lifers, people ages 20 to 40, and asking how they were dealing with overwhelm. And the strangest thing was nobody asked me to define that. They're like, oh, okay. They just started talking about overwhelm of all kinds. But the book that emerged from this turned into or encapsulated their overwhelm in terms of the digital, the encounter, the saturation, the presence of the digital in our lives. And from there, I started moving towards saying, okay, so like, where do I want to talk about this? Where's a site where that digital overwhelm is felt? Like it's everywhere, but the people I was talking to were definitely working professionals, and it made sense to focus on work culture. So that was my pathway.
Yeah. So was there a direct connection between digital overwhelm and work culture that you found?
So it did surprise me. I wasn't expecting it. In chapter 4, I think, of this book, I started asking about what work. Actually, I don't think I thought of this. I think it was the people I was talking to who said that they wanted to talk about what their work meant or didn't mean in conditions of digital overwhelm. And sometimes technological change can make our work seem irrelevant, or it can charge it with significance or new possibilities. And yeah, I didn't see that coming, but people that I was talking to really wanted to talk about what their work meant. And I started to explore postures towards work in these conditions. And in that 4th chapter of the book, I explore, I think, 4 different postures that people take. It was surprisingly diverse to me. I think I could have kept going and described more and more postures.
These like psychological postures or physical postures?
Good question. Yeah, I mean it as a figure of speech, like a metaphor. It does involve the physical, though, so it's a really wonderful metaphor. But I mean it primarily as a sort of personal orientation towards your work. And I think I started by thinking about it towards your job, but there may be, I think that there's an underlying posture towards work itself, towards toil, you might say. Right. And I think sometimes we simplify that, especially when we're thinking intergenerationally. Oh, Gen Xers are compulsive workaholics and Gen Z's hate work. And it's really, of course, it's much more varied than that. But that was one area of exploration.
Yeah, I'm not sure Gen X the same as me, or
I am Gen X,
yeah.
yes.
So I'm pretty sure the boomers said that about us when we were on our way up as well.
Yeah, probably.
Is the kind of thing that happens. But does this kind of relate in some way to maybe the old sort of adage that how you do anything is how you do everything, or is there some truth to that?
Oh, yeah, I like that adage. Here's what I can say. I can say that when I was talking with these working professionals in these sort of extended interviews, you did have a feeling you were talking about everything. Maybe that's just like authors, they it feels like whatever they're writing about is the central topic of the universe. But yeah, it did feel highly connective to ask people about their work, to ask people about their experience of technologized workspaces. And so, yeah, I think that adage connects.
Mm. I know for a lot of speakers and coaches and people in my audience, burnout is I think it's
Mhm.
across the board really, but I know for
Mhm.
entrepreneurs particularly, burnout can be a really big issue. I know, and I've worked with so many people who have been through that.
Um,
And I know our digital life certainly can contribute to that. What from your work can you help us with, like, maybe what are some of the clues that you're on the path to that, and maybe some of the things that you might want to start to think about changing?
I don't know if there's a particular kind of burnout that's unique to digital life and digital work, but so some of the markers are very similar. And I didn't come up with these markers, just to be clear, but I saw them.
Yeah.
So it could be that you have a profound sense of exhaustion. That's one very common form of like an indicator of burnout. Another might be a sort of rising cynicism. And I did sense among some of these rising professionals, not a pervasive cynicism, but at least a skepticism about institutions and their benevolence towards them. And then the other indicator might be a sense of, I just can't do my job anymore. And that was a peculiar thing to me. I remember talking with a person who's been working in marketing for quite a while. So one of the sort of millennial interviewees, and she commented that like when she got into the business, there were professionals that surrounded her who were senior to her and for whom there seemed to be something of a manual for how to do the work. And she's today, no manual. It's just, it's so rapidly changing that I don't know what the rules are. And I don't know if anybody does. So
Mm.
in those conditions, she said, I feel constantly behind. That's just my perpetual sense of orientation is I'm back there somewhere. So I have a question for you. I wonder
Yeah.
if you could talk about the experience of burnout for presenters. I think some people might say, oh, you sidle onto a stage, you do your talk, you go home. So what is it about that work that is particularly fatiguing?
I don't I don't necessarily think it's always the presenting itself, although that can happen. And I've
Okay.
certainly worked with people who will do things like 3-day, 5-day events where they are mostly on the stage from morning till
Oh,
night,
I see.
which to me is crazy. Like, I could not do that. I can do an hour, maybe two, and then I'm good. I'm not going to be doing like whole day events where I'm on the stage talking pretty much the whole time. So I think that does lead to that, and a lot of the travel that's involved,
Mhm.
especially if you're doing that all the time. That can definitely be one path to a sort of potential burnout.
Mm.
But I think more realistically for most of us in this space, it is the amount of content we have to create that's promotional material, the creative
Mm.
aspects of what we do. But it is like
Mhm.
podcast, having or being on podcasts is one part of that. All the Zoom presentations we're supposed to do, all the video and audio content we're supposed to be put out in social media posts. And often a lot of the people I work with feel that they have to be everywhere on
Oh,
social media
yeah.
if they're gonna break through at all, and they're
Yeah.
breaking the necks trying to do it and burning themselves out. So I
I,
think there's two aspects of that, but the latter one probably being the more common.
I remember talking with, to make a connection with that experience, I remember talking with a woman professional in LA and in the film industry and in a particular corner of the film industry. So she wasn't behind the camera or on the set somewhere, but she was working for a company that designed key images for films. Like when you go on Netflix or Hulu or something, you see all these squares that you can click on to watch a show, but you can see a little bit about the show just by looking at the square. So that was the kind of work she was doing. And she, she was a relatively young professional. I think she was maybe in her late 20s. And she's, even in her time in the industry, they had shifted from their primary work being posters to their primary work being everywhere, and so many different kinds of images they had to create. It reminds me of these presenters who are trying to create this sort of sense of a holistic organization on socials. Yeah, it is. It's absolutely exhausting, especially if you don't get a lot of reciprocity from your audience if you're just
And you probably
disseminating.
don't if you're spreading yourself thin, trying to be on all the platforms. Probably not. But I think it's what people see the bigger names in the industry doing, but not recognizing or thinking that they have teams of people who are
Yes,
doing most of
yes.
that for them, and they've already built up a following on at
Mhm,
least one platform.
mhm,
But trying to build up these sort of followings and lead
mhm.
opportunities from everywhere all at once is nigh on impossible. And it is unfortunately a recipe for some kind of burnout.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just one of those things. But I think you talk about some different approaches that we can take to cope or manage in our workplaces. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yes, I keep seeing your name, John Ball, coach and speaker. And I'm like, yeah, what would I put under my name? Pickleball player, maybe dog walker. But one of my vocations is that I have been a professor of communication for a long time. And so I am constantly thinking about things in communicational terms. And so when I was gathering these stories from Gen Z and millennial professionals, I tended to clump them into categories I was familiar with as a communication scholar. And the modes of coping that I saw, no surprise, were what they tended to be communicational. I think that a, that's somewhat my occupational psychosis, but it's also really useful. Honestly, a lot of organizational life is managed, is repaired, is changed, is constructed in the first place through people interacting.
Mm.
And they do so in a bunch of different ways. So I identified 6 modes of communication that people used to deal with the of it all. And I can jump into those, but that was my sort of basic approach.
Yeah, I think I would love to hear an overview of what those six methods are.
Sure. So if my working memory can recall them is the question. I used kind of communication theory terms for these, but then in the book I was like, that's not going to work. People don't talk about disseminative models of communication, not so much. So I just called it sending things or saying things or meaning things or signaling things or advocating things, which brings it close to present influence. But I think there was one other one that had to do with fixing things because our tech is constantly breaking down too. And I asked people, like, how do you cope with the sort of email overwhelm? And I tried to think with them about how to do that well. And that would be in the realm of sending things. And for me, when I'm overwhelmed in some kind of collaborative group, sending something out can feel, at least briefly, relieving to me. Oh, I've done that. I've sent this thing out. There's a 900-word email that'll get us all on the same page. But for other people, that might not be very helpful. It might be overwhelming in and of itself. And
Mm.
they might prefer, let's just get together and say some things to each other, face to face or on screen. And yeah, one of my kind of lessons or learnings from doing this work is that we need to become adept at more than one mode of communication. And that's a really important way to care for our teammates and really contribute to the effective functioning of our organizations. I
Yeah.
think we tend to lock in to one or two modes, and it's a good idea to cultivate a kind of portfolio of ways of coping. Maybe don't go to your preferred one first, but ask, okay, what does this context require? What does this person require, or these people that I'm working with? And so I basically explore the strengths and weaknesses of each of these really if wonderful approaches, and then basically recommend communicational flexibility in these digital spaces.
It's something interesting. An organization I was working with last year, one of the things that they did was disk profiles for everybody in the organization. Now,
Mhm.
I'm not 100% bought into get into disk as can be useful, I'm sure, but personality tests in general, I'm a little bit dubious of. But one of the things that came out of this was all the different communication styles and the conversations that started to come up in the teams about how they prefer to receive communication and
Hmm.
what they like and what they don't like. And I think there was more of an encouragement to try and communicate to other people in the way that they like rather than in the way that we don't. Is that kind of where you're heading with that as well?
Yes, I think so. I think that's a good synopsis of it. In some ways, you write a book and you realize, oh, this is common sense. This is what everybody really actually knows. It's just you come at it from a different level. And I think for me, the different level was in digital spaces, which kind of today it feels very, like Americans might say, it feels like the Wild West. It's just so many different sets of norms, so many different kinds of expectations. Your manners change, the rules and the codes. And so trying to just the simple fact of trying to remember how you connected with someone, was that by text or DM or Slack or email, or did we talk on Teams? What was it? How did we connect? Where is that messaging? And then that's a very sort of mechanical question, but then the less logistical and more relational question is the one you're asking of just what's going to be the most humane way for you and me to connect in this moment. And that
Yeah.
takes some flexibility, honestly. It takes some real flexibility.
I I suppose it should be fairly easy for us to identify our preferred modes of communication. Is that
Mm.
right? And we should be able to know if we prefer to
I
email or
think so.
text or
I think
voicemail.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that sometimes it's more so your mode of communication. I tried to use kind of generalized terms like saying things or sending things or
Right.
signaling things. I think like some people prefer the sort of less is more kind of mode of communication. And then that can translate into different kinds of platforms. But yeah, I asked people in these interviews, here are some approaches to communication. What do you prefer? And it wasn't hard for people to say, no, I like that. That's my home base. Yeah, I think you're right.
Did you find people found it equally as easy to identify where they weren't so strong in communicating?
Yeah, I think so. Almost everybody, and it was usually other people's modes that they didn't like.
Right.
So I'm thinking of a working professional in Chicago area, Chicagoland, who, you know, very orderly mind, just very structured, loved systems. She was really good at that, worked in HR. And yeah, her bosses would maybe read 2 lines of an email and they wanted to get everybody in the room and let's whiteboard and put stickers on the wall and let's be the brilliant entrepreneur types. And let's do this. You call that where you fast learning or mobile learning or where you're
Disruptive
communicating.
learning, maybe, I don't know.
What was it again?
Disruptive learning or something
Yeah.
like that.
It was disruptive to her anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think people could usually say what they didn't. How about for you? Do you have an identifiable approach to communication that you just feel more at home with?
Boy, oh boy. I think I maybe don't love emails
Mhm.
because at least sending them, I don't mind receiving them because I tend to just be like when I write emails, I have to go back into them and put the niceties in afterwards because I'm just like straight to business. I just want to say what I got to say and get that out there. And so I have to go back and say, oh yeah, I probably should say hello, good morning, how are you? Before, so all that stuff gets added in afterwards. I don't know if I should be admitting to that, but yeah, I do prefer vocal communication. I think from years of doing voice coaching, I'm someone who, no, I like to leave I will probably more likely leave voice messages, less keen on video, but I will do it. So yeah, I probably do prefer
Yeah.
face to face more than anything
So
else. Yeah.
so you what about a distinction in mode between being on stage or being in a kind of interpersonal conversation? Do you have a sort of comfort level with either of those? Are they the same?
I'd probably rather be on stage, but I'm comfortable with both, and I have over time made myself more comfortable, which maybe relates to some of what you're talking about here as well.
Mhm.
I certainly have struggled in the past with a bit of social awkwardness and anxiety. that I've worked very hard to get past. So even historically, I would much rather be on stage where I don't have to interact in those kinds of ways so much,
Mhm.
even though I'm much more in the spotlight when I'm on stage.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always seem to make sense. So I have less anxiety about getting up on a
Mhm.
stage and speaking to a whole room of people than I did at
Yes.
least about
Yeah.
having social group interaction.
Right.
But I'm a lot better at it now because I made a
Uh-huh.
decision that I needed to be better at it.
Oh, I love that. I'm very much similar to you. I tend to feel more comfortable with a kind of broadcast of the stage, or I was in radio for the first 10 years of my career. And
Cool.
that in some ways has some kind of oral presentational dynamics to it. You don't see your audience, you're disseminating, you're scattering your words out there like you do from a stage, and you have very little interaction with them. But I found that my anxiety or overwhelm just shifts around. I'm not nervous to walk out on a stage at all. I like that. I like the rush of it and that kind of strange sense of people all maybe 10, 20 feet away from you in the dark. You can barely see them, but you can feel this energy. It's
Yeah.
wonderful. On the other hand, being in an interpersonal conversation, like I can feel anxious, like walking into that. Oh boy, I don't know how this is going to go. But afterwards, often I feel great. Oh, that was fun. That was a lot better than I thought it would be. But after a presentation, I can often have a sense of overwhelm. I don't know how you would coach me on this, John, but I have this sense of like, how did that go? How did they receive that from 50 different angles? And what just happened? So, yeah.
Generally, I would say let them give you the feedback on that and assume that if you did your job and you were practiced enough that you got everything you had to get. If
Okay.
you got laughs where you were supposed to get laughs, you did a great job. But that's where I tend to go with. I think I've been and known people in the acting world for years and years, and it tends to be more actors who have that sort of performance insecurity afterwards as well. But it does happen in speakers too. Of the was I any good? And the chances are yes, because if you weren't, someone will tell you. Probably someone will tell you, or you'll see it, And if you're an
Yeah.
actor, someone's going to tell you. If you're on stage, you've got a director or something like that, someone's
Yeah.
going to tell you that wasn't good. If you're a speaker, you're going to get probably just very vague, non-specific feedback, or people just go, "Oh yeah, it's great, thanks." Not very with low conviction. You will read it in people, and you have to take that, but take it as feedback. Don't take it as final judgment. So that's
Yeah, that's
probably where I
hard.
would coach you on it. It is just feedback, and you want that because that's what you
Yeah.
get better from.
Oh, that's great. It's just data. Just take it in, process it. Yeah. Use it for
It really is
presentation.
that. And I'll tell you why I've come to realize that even more because I've been stepping into the world of stand-up comedy a bit. And
Oh, that's cool.
it is cool and it's terrifying. Compared to
Uh,
just speaking and presenting, it's
uh,
terrifying.
uh,
And in the moment if you're doing a good job or not, because you're on stage to do one thing. And so it's either happening or it's not.
mhm.
But if you come off and you bomb, it doesn't mean your comedy life is over. It means you're going to have to do some work on this to get
Mm,
better at it.
mm,
And that's the thing. The laughs are feedback, and that's all
mhm.
they are. The laughs or the no laughs or the groans, they're feedback that helps you to grow from. It's hard not to
Wow.
take this stuff personally, but
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
essential. But I want to ask you about one of the things that when I do coach people on overwhelm, one of the things I
Mhm.
will often say to them is that probably the main solution to overwhelm is simplification. Do you agree with that, or do you see it as being other things?
I'm laughing because, yes, I also default to, okay, we got to simplify this. We got to whittle this down. This is crazy. I am of two minds on this, John. So, some of the most common kinds of digital overwhelm advice out there from people like Oliver Berkman or Cal Newport, they do tend to have a sensibility of you're going to have to make some decisions. You're going to have to pare some things away. You're going to need to get rid of some things. And I love that. I depend on that wisdom. I use it all the time. So if you coached me in that way, I would say, yes, I'm going to do that, or I'm going to try to do that.
Right.
But at the same time, my book, Digital Overwhelm, is recommending not digital minimalism, but digital flexibility. And I
Okay.
think that's also an important value. And I try not to pit these against each other, except when I'm feeling cantankerous. But digital flexibility is important, especially for people who might not feel particularly powerful in their organizations. Maybe they don't have a lot of choice about what platforms to be on or what tech to be using. Sometimes the recommendation for digital minimalism can be a little privileged. It assumes that people have more choice in the workplace or in their lives than they actually do. So sometimes people in their 20s and 30s are put in jobs where they're just like, here are 10 platforms, you need to master them all, and you need to
Right.
be watching them.
Yeah.
And so coaching a kind of flexibility of being able to switch your mode, learning that as a kind of craft, just like you learn the speech craft, is, I think, an important value. And that's really where my book comes down. I'm hoping, a selling proposition for this book. I'm
Yeah,
not
because
saying
now,
the same thing as everybody else.
no, because now you say that, I hadn't really thought about the fact that, yeah, simplification, great. But what about the situations where you don't get to choose that? Where you, as you say, you have to, all right, in this job, here's your 10 platforms, learn them and master them. You don't have the option to
Mhm.
simplify your digital overwhelm. You just have to deal with it. And maybe get better at managing it. And as you say, being flexible at switching between those. So I hadn't really thought about that, and that's a really valuable point. There are technologies that we just have to use, and
Right.
we're not always in a position to be able to delegate them to somebody else. So
Yeah,
I
I
do
think
like that.
so. I appreciate the affirmation because I feel like it's a little counterintuitive because that simplification advice feels so deeply wise. It's embedded in a lot of religious traditions and kind of spiritual practices as well. So I feel like it just feels like, yes, that's what I want to say yes to. One more thing I would say about that, John, is that even on a macro level, we don't have a whole lot of choice about our technologies. There are certain ways that we can say, I'm just not going to buy that. Like, how many people have you met who said, I didn't get a smartphone till 2015 or something like that?
Right.
Not a lot of people, but it seems like a story some people like to tell us. I never bought an Apple Watch, or I didn't buy this, or so they define themselves by what they say no to. But on the other hand, like, we don't really get to say what's going to show up in the technology market. And that is a huge disadvantage for us. We didn't get to weigh in on artificial intelligence. We didn't get
Mm.
to weigh in on various kinds of, like what the MacBook would be able to do. So much of this stuff, we're on the receiving end of it. And so I think digital flexibility is important in a lot of spaces of human life.
Because the chances are that the main programs and apps that we're using in 5 or 10 years will be completely different to the ones we have today. Yeah, that
Yes.
makes a lot of sense, and we do need to keep up with them. Otherwise, they'll end up being like my mum with the video remote control, having no idea how to use it. But that's
My
cool.
sympathies.
It's okay. Even after buying one of those ones with big buttons and labeling them all for her and writing down the instructions, yeah, thankfully she doesn't need to use it too much. But let me ask you, do you feel that the ability to be able to switch more effectively between these different modes of communication improves our ability to communicate and connect? And does it help us in other ways,
Mhm.
is what I'm asking.
I've become interested. This is a little bit of a sidebar, John, but I've become interested recently in a kind of therapy, an approach to therapy called RFT, or relational frame theory. And it's all about trying to diversify your options for action in situations that are unpleasant, and which we run into all the time, right? And so you find yourself in what you call aversive situations. I don't want to be here. And for me, okay, this is an embarrassing admission, but I do not like board games. And
Okay.
I find that this is a real moral failing on my part because board games are amazing. But
I'm
when
a
I'm in
fan,
a
yeah.
board game, yeah, I become a sort of constricted, arthritic, fixed kind of person. And nobody likes me, and I don't like me. And so I've been trying to say, okay, there have to be other ways that I can respond to this sort of, for me, not comfortable situation. And so I think in a similar way, learning to switch your modes of communication can just give you more options and more suppleness in working relationships. I think in intimate domestic relationships and just neighborly relationships as well. You're just constantly finding yourself in situations where you're like, I don't quite feel at home here. And if you default to one mode of coping with that, like me, I just freeze up during a board game.
Mhm.
You don't have as much fun. People around you don't have as much fun. And life isn't, it's narrowed down. So
Yeah.
I think there's a connection between learning to mode switch and learning to live well.
Was there a bad experience in your childhood playing the game of life or something like that?
I don't know. Yeah, I need some therapy here, John.
I'm
I
not
know.
necessarily I love board games as well.
Good for you, man. I don't
It's
know. There's something about the way my eyes glaze over as people are telling me the rules to some Byzantine game that I'm just
oh my
like,
goodness.
ugh, be somewhere
I
else.
love all that stuff. We diverge on board games at least, but let me say, there is. I was talking about I mentioned earlier about some old adages. There is one about the more options you have, the more flexibility you have. The more flexibility you have, the more power you have in situations, and that does seem to feel relevant here. Or like the more options you have on how you communicate, the more power you have to be able to
Mhm.
communicate effectively. Which, of course, is one way of saying you are increasing your ability, your influence, and your influence is
Mhm.
influenceability a real word? I should know that, but your ability to influence is going to be much higher because of
Yeah,
it.
I think so. I think that sounds right. I would take notes on that point. I think that's well said. Yeah.
We spend
Mm.
a lot of our time these days, probably especially since COVID, but I was certainly on this well before, on Zoom presentations. And I wonder if you have any advice for us on how we can best manage our communication with that one that we probably all use, maybe daily.
Mhm. I can try. I can try. My chapter on so in this book there are, like, as I said, 6 modes of communication. Each one is followed by a half chapter that's like a workshop. And one of the workshops focuses on Zoom fatigue and why that happens and how to deal with it. But your question is a little bit different. You're saying not just like how do you deal with the weariness that sets in after 6 hours of Zoom meetings, but just like how do you do this well?
Mm.
So let's think together about that. That's a little bit different from what I was writing about, but I want to think about that because I do think that it's an important realm of professional and honestly in many personal and volunteering parts of our lives as well. So I'll start, and then I'd like to hear from you as well.
Sure.
So one thing that comes to mind for me is it takes a deceptive amount of vocal energy to communicate well in the Zoom room. There's something that's flattening about the Zoom screen and the way that it positions us right next to each other on this sort of 2D space. And and so there's a kind of flattening effect, which I think is easy to absorb as a speaker or as a communicator in one of these meetings. And you can just respond to that flattening by a sort of vocal flattening as well. I'm just not going to put much energy into it. But I think that good communication in digital spaces like this actually requires more energy than you might expect. And it is rewarded if you are able to show up vocally and in your gestures and in your facial expressions. I think that people feel that. Humans are quick to pick up on those social cues and they'll see, oh yeah, they're totally here.
Yeah.
So that's a start. What are you thinking?
I my perspectives are not research; they're just my own anecdotal experience, I
Mhm.
suppose. But from having worked with so many remote organizations, and as someone who works with the majority of my clients remotely as well, I would say that I've never really experienced Zoom fatigue. I've just experienced bad Zoom meetings. So whilst we might spend, I've always spent a lot of time on Zoom, well before COVID, well before everyone was talking about all this. I was on Zoom when the company first started. It's like been on using it a long time, and I've never felt any fatigue from it, even when I spent whole days working on it, which I do. But I agree with what you said. about how people don't recognize that they need to turn up the energy a bit on virtual meetings. And I'll share this with you. Where I may have said this before on my show, but I haven't said it in this conversation. When I was being trained to be a virtual presenter for a company that has mostly done live presentations and was moving more into virtual, they when they were training me up to deliver their online trainings, it was one of the things that came up again and again of that the energy isn't high enough. The energy isn't high enough to a point where the boss's wife, who is also a partner in the business, said to me, if you can't do this the next time we do this practice, we will find someone who can. I was like, oh, that scared me a bit. And I thought, I better make sure I can do this. It is so important to be able to turn up the dials. And I think when we meet in person, there's such a different energy. There's such a different way that we connect with each other.
Mhm.
And I can't always pinpoint exactly what that is, but we sense each other more when we're in physical proximity to each other.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
pick up more about each other. We
Mhm.
probably even feel more comfortable because there is actual proximity connection there,
Mhm.
rather than this being, as much as it's wonderful that we can connect over thousands of miles, there's no sense of physical proximity. There's a level of comfort that goes with physical proximity where we can relax and have a conversation and maybe chill a bit. When we're on Zoom meetings, we have this ability to, I'll have to just check my email while we're chatting.
Mhm.
I'll just,
Mhm.
oh, look, a WhatsApp message, whatever it is. There's so many ways we can allow ourselves to be distracted or even choose to distract ourselves whilst we're in these things and not really be fully present and paying attention. And
Mhm.
so if you're not engaging people who are on the call with you, I think as soon as we're not engaged, our natural tendency these days is to check our mobiles or something like that.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of it for me. That was probably a very long answer
Yeah.
to your
No, I
question,
loved it.
but
I really love that. And that story about the person who said, you got to crank this up. Thought, wow, I'm feeling a little traumatized by that. I wasn't in it.
I
That
tell
sounds
you, it
difficult.
was me and another coach who were being trained on this. We both got told the same thing, and
Yeah.
both of us afterwards just like, crap.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
sweat's going out. We better sort this out. But we did it. We did it. But sometimes I
That's
think
awesome.
sometimes it does show that sometimes you do have to be pushed
Mhm.
to get you over that
Mhm.
level of, I think, what's naturally uncomfortable about turning up these dials. I
Mhm.
think people worry that they're going to come across as some madcap children's entertainer who is high on something and bouncing off the walls. You do have to temper it,
Yeah.
of course,
Yeah.
but unless you've taken something that's going to make you like that, the chances are you'll probably be
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
But it's a bit more like me after 3 cups of coffee. Is I'm going to be a little bit more hyper than usual, but not too much.
It occurs to me that it's like the difference between stage acting and television acting. Television acting, like the cues, the camera is just so close to you, and all those like micro cues are visible and apparent, and you can really work at a very subtle, understated level. On stage, not so much. You have to be overstated. You have to communicate to the person in the back row. And
Absolutely, yeah.
it feels like digital space is much more like that second option, which is bizarre because you would think like my MacBook is just 8 inches from my face, so it should be picking up all my micro cues, but it doesn't.
It's
It's much more
it's
like stage acting.
probably a great way to think about it because you can't really just go on stage and be a sort of normal conversational energy if your conversational level of energy isn't quite high naturally and expect that people are going to stay tuned into that.
Mhm.
You can get up and do it, but are you going to engage your audience? Probably not, or not for very long. So
Yeah.
keeping that energy up and even having some switches in the energy and things like that, I think it is
Mhm.
important that we have a little variance in the energies that we take people on. Because I think we do have this
Yeah.
thing of if we stay at one level for any level for too
Yes.
long, it starts
Yes.
to irritate us.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
think we do need a variety of energies, but
Mhm.
we probably
Mhm.
do. They, I always say this thing like Simon Cowell, the judge on the talent shows, who
Mhm.
would he used to always say things like, "I want to be you, but more you." And I was like, "What the heck does that even mean?" But I think this is what he's talking about: turning up the dials. You have to turn up
Mhm.
the dials. It needs to be
Mhm.
you, but turned up to 11.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great. You, but more you.
You, but more you, yeah. You've really enjoyed this conversation, and I know you do have, as well as your book, Digital Overwhelm, you do
Mhm.
have a weekly newsletter yourself and a podcast, yeah?
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up, John. I write a Substack newsletter, as who doesn't these days? And this focuses on work culture. I do bring up digital overwhelm quite a lot because I'm interested in that, but I'm also just addressing questions of like, how do you deal with distracted coworkers? That was a situation where the digital and the work culture stuff intersected. Questions like that are the sort of frequent currency of this newsletter. And then the podcast, which is attached to it, one comes out at the beginning of the week, one comes out at the end. The podcast is really more of a team. I'm working with an intergenerational team, a boomer, Xer, millennial, and a Z. And we sort through these kind of work culture questions from our different generational standpoints. And
Oh,
that's a
great.
terrific lot of fun. It's called The Mode Switch, and I'd love for people to check it out.
Great. And so I know you have a website which is called themodeswitch.com. Is that where we can get all the information on the
Yes.
newsletter, the podcast, and the book and all that?
Yes. And my
Fantastic.
social security, my blood type, just whatever information you want. It's there.
Well, I think Elon's already got it.
Unfortunately. Yes.
Craig, it's been a real pleasure chatting to you today. I thoroughly
Thank you,
enjoyed the
John.
conversation. I certainly hope the audience will have as well. And just say thank you for coming on Percent Influence.
Yes, I'm grateful to you too, John. I come away from this feeling a little better informed, and that's terrific fun.
Good to hear. Thanks, Craig. I hope you enjoyed that and got some great tips for it as well. I'm certainly going to be implementing some of these strategies so I can manage the digital overwhelm that sometimes crops up, especially being introduced to new AI tools all the time. Now, if you enjoyed the show and maybe you've even listened to a few of our shows before, but you haven't yet left us a review, please do pick up your device, go and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you would like to leave a review for us that lets other people know you've enjoyed the show and it's worth their time to check us out as well. It certainly helps. It certainly helps us, and I would appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. Now, I did miss my Friday episode last week. The Easter holidays kind of got in the way, and I just wasn't able to get an episode together. I apologize for that, but we will have a solo episode this Friday, and we'll continue some of the things. I'm going to talk about some of the AI tools that I'm using that are helping me with my content creation and things like that, that may be useful to you. And by no means am I any kind of expert in this, but as a non-expert, and maybe you're also a non-expert, you might just find it useful to hear about what AI tools I'm finding most effective right now and where I'm getting the most value. So I'm going to share that with you in Friday's episode. I've been planning a series for a while on logical fallacies and rhetorical devices. And I think those kinds of things could be very interesting. There would be pretty short episodes where we will introduce you or maybe reintroduce you to some logical fallacies or some rhetorical devices that are going to potentially help you with things like argumentation or structure, or even being able to potentially help clean up your own thinking and improve influence on yourself and other people. Certainly, rhetorical devices can help you to do that. So I hope that will be some value for you. Next, on my next episode, I'm going to be speaking to Dr. Thomas Troutman, and we're going to be talking about neuroscience of influence. He's a fascinating man, and it's a fascinating episode. And if you're like me and you like to nerd out on the science of influence and all the good stuff that goes with that, you're going to love that episode. I hope you'll come and join. If you are not already subscribed to the show, please make sure you do subscribe. And if you're on YouTube, hit that notifications alert so you get notifications for all of our shows and episodes. And one more thing, if you are also a coach, you may want to check out the Coaching Clinic podcast that I do with my good friend and amazing coach, Angie Besignano. We have over 50 episodes there for you, all about how to build and grow your coaching business and deepen your coaching practices with your clients. So if you enjoy this, you'll enjoy that even more. Angie's great. She's a lot of fun. You'll love her, and you'll get to hear a bit more of me as well if you can cope with that. And I hope to see you there too. All right, that's it for me. Wherever you're going, whatever you're doing, have an amazing rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.